Hi everyone, I am so excited to be speaking with this author. Her name is Shannon Esposito, and this book, The Burning, that we're going to be talking about is her newest book. It's the first one in this. She's written like cozy novels. This is her first psychological thriller, and it goes under S.O. Esposito, and I'm assuming it's because of it being a new genre for her. But I was reading this book last night at midnight. I was finishing it up, and I started to get really scared. I was like, okay, put the book down. I mean, this book is intense. Okay? Intense. I don't know how to tell you how intense this is. I started to think about whether I had another personality. And I was like, well, it could be useful, but no, I think not. I think it'd be more scary than useful. But she has you think, oh, I don't know. I don't know what to say. I'm going to talk to her and I'm going to let her talk about this as much as she can. But let's just say it has to do with multiple personality disorder. And it starts to get a little freaky and you start to think you have one. And, so what kind of a good psychological thriller would it be if you didn't think that by the end of this book? So everyone, here is Shannon. Everyone, I am so excited because I get to speak with author Shannon Esposito today about her new book called The Burning, and she is going to hold it up for us because I want to see the cover. I've been looking at it on different things and I haven't gotten to hold the physical book, but there it is, and it came out this month, beginning of this month. It's only been out a couple of weeks, and Shannon, people are talking about this book. First of all, I see that cover like on Instagram all the time. Like every time I go on there, that cover. So everybody's loving the cover so much.
Yeah, I was really happy with the way it came out, definitely.
Yeah, and it's just there are so few words I can say. This book, I was reading it late last night because I always like to read it right before I talk to you because I'm in menopause and I can't remember things, and I need it to be very fresh in my mind. And so it was like midnight last night, and I was like, okay, I need to set this book down. It was so good. It's just it kind of creeps up on you. It's not one of those scary, like, that's why psychological thrillers are different. It's not like scary like you jump or anything. It's just kind of like at a certain point I was like, I'm not breathing. Okay, calm down, calm down.
Okay, I did my job.
Yes, you did. Yeah, because you don't realize like how intense you're getting as you're just, and I didn't even realize how late it was because that's how involved I was. And main character is Alice, and I loved her so much.
Yeah, I can tell you, her origins actually came from a flash fiction piece that I wrote back in 2011. And she was basically the goddess of war locked up in a mental institution. And somebody breaks her out, and she, of course, wreaks havoc on the world. And her character really would not leave me alone for years. She just kept talking to me and wanted a longer story. So this is her longer story.
And isn't it interesting that she was talking to you and then she
Yeah, I took over.
No, I mean, okay, so just so everybody knows your history, you've written a lot of cozy novel books, and I went on there when I had first contacted you, and I was like, wait a second, I don't remember talking about these books, and I like went back and I'm like, okay, because this book is under S.O. Esposito, and not that I wouldn't have talked about the puppy books, because, those look
They're
like a
fun.
lot of fun. Yeah. Yeah, those look like a ton of fun. But then I found this and I was like, oh, right, this is the one. This is the one I want to read. And I am so happy I read it. But I was thinking last night, like while I'm reading this, I'm like, okay, well, first of all, it's hit home for me in a lot of different ways, but because I don't talk about it a lot, but I was sexually abused as a child. And so I think that if you ever have been, anybody who's watching, if you've had any kind of sexual assault, whatever, you will relate to her character. And even though my story is a lot different than hers, I think that I was in her head of like some of the feelings that she went through. It just spoke to me, and so I was like, And then of course she has multiple personality disorder. We've talked about that. That is her main thing. And you know what? Do you remember? I mean, you look old enough to maybe remember Sybil, like back in the day.
I do, yeah.
Okay, because when I say that to my children, they were like, "Who?" And I'm like, "Okay." Well, I was young. I'm 53, so when that came out, I was young. I didn't see it. My parents were like, "No," and I don't even know what year it came out exactly, but
I don't either, but it was pretty long time ago.
and it was
Um,
very shocking. Do you remember that people were like
yeah,
shocked by
yeah, and
that?
a lot of people didn't believe her. A lot of people think that these people are making it up, and that's the thing that struck me about, because I read a lot of autobiographies of people with, they call it dissociative identity disorder now, because they figured out it's actually not, it's actually a problem of memory and not personality. It's a memory dysfunction.
Right.
So when I was reading these autobiographies, the thing that really hit me was these people are not being believed. They're just, they're living with this nightmare basically that they have to go through alone, or if they can find a good psychologist, that's great. But their stories are just tough. Especially there was one book called When the Rabbit Howls that was so devastating for me to read, about this, what this little girl went
I
through.
actually remember
I actually had to throw the book away because it was so disturbing that
that.
I was having nightmares, and I just had to get it out of my house. So yeah, it's a tough topic.
It is a really tough topic. I mean, there's so many things on the spectrum of
Mhm.
like it's not like there's the I think maybe that's why people have such a hard time, like only psychiatrists understand it's that not the same thing happens to everyone.
Right. Right. And,
It's
and most of us go through things like disassociation if we have a trauma, and that's, a degree of it, or, like you driving somewhere and not remembering how you got there. That's the exact same mechanism in the brain. So,
right. Exactly. Well, I did have when I was a young child going through this, but as a teenager, um I would have I'd end up on the ceiling
oh,
looking
yes.
down.
Yeah.
And so that's why
Depersonalization.
when I
Yeah.
was reading, yeah, I was like, oh my gosh, I remember. I haven't had that in a long time, but when I was a teenager, I went through that. I'd
Yeah.
be somewhere and I could be looking at myself, you know?
Right. And that's just your brain protecting you, which is so amazing that our brains can do that,
Right,
you know.
right. That's why I was so interested in her story because she's trying to figure she doesn't remember her story. So,
Right.
this book is her trying to remember the parts, and you know what? I don't either. There's parts I don't remember. I think that's normal. I
Yeah.
not quite as extreme as hers, but to put things in a chronological order of my childhood is very difficult for me because I don't remember chronology very well. But
Yeah.
anyway, so that's why I was like in this book I was like, "Oh my god, it's so real." But then, she has a lot of other I don't know how much you want to get into it, but she has interesting things that her psychiatrist finds out. But I love her psychiatrist. Loved her.
She is one of my favorite characters I've ever made. I want her to be in my life.
I know. I know. I was like, I've been to a lot of counseling in my life, but I liked her. I was like, I never had anybody quite like her. She was really, really good for her. You
She
know,
was, yeah.
and
Alice got lucky.
yeah, I just think for this to be your first, I could not believe it was your first psychological thriller.
Oh, thank you.
I just.
Yeah, I mean, going from cozy mysteries, which are kind of very formula, there's definite things that have to happen in cozy mysteries, in mysteries in general.
Right.
Um, and when I first started writing this book, it came to me differently. It came to me in scenes. So she would tell me, oh, here's a scene of, Alice sitting down with her friends talking, or here's a scene when she remembers something from the past, or so. And I had no idea how all of this was coming together. And because of the character that she started from, being the goddess of war, I had no idea what kind of book it was going to be. I thought, oh, is this going to be magical realism? Because this woman
Right.
obviously thinks she's the goddess of war.
Right.
So is it going to be fantasy? I had no idea until I figured out that she's both. She is a mother, a human mother, and she is a person who thinks she's the goddess of war. So that's when it became a suspense. So
Yeah, well, I don't know.
crazy, right?
Like I said, after this morning, I finished the very end of it, and I was just like, okay.
I wish I
And I
could
go,
talk to you about the end and what you think about that, but we won't
well,
talk
can
about
we
it
just
yet.
say that I loved the ending? I loved it. I can say that. And I can also tell people that if because a lot of people are like, oh, I'll just go to the end. If you go to the end, you aren't going to get it anyway. So don't
Yeah.
bother. So just read the book because, most of the time you can't do that anyway with these books. You can't just jump to the end. You have to read it to get into the story. And that's the fun of it anyway. Who would do that anyway? But I do know people. I know
Yeah,
people that
I
do
do too.
it. I just think that's, why have the book and go through, you can't really experience it that way. But
Yeah.
okay, so in the very beginning of the book, I actually wrote this down because it was on my phone, but I wanted to be able to read it to everybody because I loved how you started this book off. And this is I was reading it on my Kindle. So this was on the first page that I opened up on my Kindle. And it says, and it's a little long, everyone, so just relax. It's all good. It says, to every crime, there should be a witness, someone to care, to cry, to choke on their outrage, someone who will then rise up and use that fire I couldn't read my own handwriting. Fire like an alchemist to make the world a safer place. I'm hoping that witness will be you. And then it's signed Alice. And you have to read the book because when I first read it, I was like, well, that's confusing. Like I didn't understand but then as you read the book and you go back and I went back and I was like, oh, that is so awesome.
You think you were confused. That was the first thing that she ever told me. So I had no idea what, was going to happen. But, and so when it started turning into a story of protection and revenge, then I understood that.
Yeah, and to me, it just spoke to me because, especially I'm 53. Back in the 70s and 80s, people didn't talk about what happened in homes, in your home. It just
Right.
wasn't talked about. And so you feel I felt very alone. And I'm so happy that we're in a day and age, and especially right now, and
Mm-hmm.
we are talking the day after the Bill Cosby trial,
Yeah.
and to be in a day where he has to stand up and he has to hear it,
Yeah.
and I was so happy yesterday. And he was a man that I admired a lot,
Mm-hmm.
because he was bigger than life. And then, you find out and you're like, wow, I admired him. And I'm so happy that women feel safe to come up against somebody as powerful as he was. Not anymore, but
Yeah.
he was.
Yeah, and it's not just these powerful men. There's a lot of stories coming out about these powerful men that abuse that power,
Right.
but it is not just these powerful
It's
men.
not
It's in
just
everyday life. It's in businesses everywhere. Anytime a man has power over a woman, there's a chance for abuse, a high chance for abuse. 1 in 5 women experience sexual assault.
right.
That's not even including sexual harassment or anything else that we experience.
Nope.
And so I got fired up a little bit about the whole, because I didn't really have a plot. I had the characters and, these pieces, but I didn't really know what the plot was going to be about. So when that Access Hollywood tape came out, that fired me up, and really because of how people were responding to it and saying, "Oh, that's just locker room talk," and I thought that's not okay.
It's just not.
And then, no, it's not okay. And why do women accept that?
Well, and what's really interesting that, going through this whole year or more of, of women coming out is that I know for me, because I used to be a legal secretary before my children, and men could sexually harass me because I was so numb because of
Yeah,
what I had experienced. So when these women would come out, I used to be like, oh, please, at first, because I was like, oh, I had that done all the time until I started to realize I was like, oh, that's because of who you are. They could
yeah,
get away with, it didn't even make me cringe.
yeah,
Okay. But now, I have 2 daughters and I'm happy if it makes them cringe or that they
yeah,
can speak out and say, no, you cannot talk to me. I mean, remember back in the day, Anita Hill. I mean, that was one instance, when that came out, I was working in Washington, D.C. for a law firm. And I was like, oh my God, men have said worse than that. What is she talking about? like,
Exactly. Yeah.
And so it numbs us to it until the women that are brave enough to stand up and say, no, no, you're not going to talk to me like that. It's just not going to
Right.
happen, you know?
Right. We have to teach them how to, you know, behave around us.
Isn't that hysterical? Like, I know we have to. It's so funny. My daughter had posted something on Facebook that said that, treat a woman with respect. That's it, idiots. Like,
Yeah, exactly. I like that. That should be bumper sticker.
right, right. Like, it's not that hard. Why is it so hard? I don't
Right.
understand, but it's like right away, it's acceptable in the workplace. And as it becomes acceptable, it kind of spiraled that, more was acceptable and then more was, and then finally it took women to be like, no, it's not.
Yeah.
And in Hollywood, I'm happy that they were calling out these men in Hollywood,
Yeah.
because they were powerful men and these
Yeah.
women
And
were putting up with it.
a lot of careers were squashed. A lot of women, got pushed aside. So I'm very excited to see what the future brings. And I'm actually happy because I wasn't sure if I wanted to traditionally publish this book or if I wanted to self-publish. And um, it worked out. Like I decided to try to pick my top, 20 dream agents, and if they decided to take it on, then I would go ahead and traditionally publish because I've been both and I'm comfortable with both
Right.
for different reasons. Um, so I had, 12 of them requested the full and didn't accept it for one reason or another afterwards. But I actually was okay with that because of the timing that this book is coming out with the Me Too movement, the Time's Up movement. I think it's a really good book to add to that conversation and kind of add to the empowerment of women. And
Yes.
and that's what I want them to get out of it. I want them, whether they've been sexually assaulted or sexually harassed, or whether they just feel like they gave everybody else their rights and didn't take care of themselves, or women do that. We give up our life and take care of everybody else and make everybody else a priority. So
Yeah.
I just wanted to give women a little bit of their power back with this book.
Yeah.
And Alice wanted, that was her goal.
Right, that was her goal, and that's why I loved her so much, because that was her goal, and she was just so endearing. It's not, I want people to understand, even though she had that personality disorder, I mean, you can relate to her, and she is, how did I want to say that? It's like, you really like, you're drawn in by her and her struggle, and it's not like something like, oh, I can't. It's not that. It's not like you said, that other book that scared you. It's not scary like that. I mean, it's really like, it's a thriller, but it's not, scary thriller.
Yeah, she's a mom. That's what she wants. Her biggest fear was having her children taken away from her,
Right.
Which happens. So,
right, exactly. So, okay, so this book came out in April, and I want to show that cover to everybody again, because that cover is just amazing. I didn't even get it at first when I first came up on my, because I'm looking at it on my phone and I'm like, what? And then when I saw it a little bit closer on my computer screen, I was like, oh, look at that. I mean, they did such a good job with the cover. It's just...
Yes, this was ebook launch that did this. So if you guys are looking for a cover, they do amazing work. And all I told them was I wanted sparks. I told them, I gave them the summary and I said, I just want sparks. So they kind of took it from there. And
you just made that. It's... So what are you working on something else? Are you going to go back to the cozy? Or are you going to stick with this genre?
I really love suspense. Like I love dark. I actually have a serial killer kind of obsession, and I've written a serial killer novel before I wrote the cozies. So I probably will go back to suspense next. I already have a character that's kind of starting to talk to me. Although I do have book 5 in the Pet Psychic series should come out this summer. Although I'm a very slow writer and I've had some health issues that are making me even a slower writer. So hopefully that'll be out. And then at the end of this year, the 3rd book in the Pause and Pose series from Seven House comes out. And that's called Doggone. And that comes out for Christmas. It's a Christmas story. So.
Oh, we have to talk because I always do Christmas books at Christmas.
Oh, okay.
I do all of the month of December. All I talk are Christmas books because there are so many good Christmas. And who wouldn't love a book like that? Like, for Christmas. So we have to talk then. That'll be
Okay.
so much fun. Yeah, I love I did it last year and it was so much fun reading all the, I don't know, it leads up to the season, just to the
It does.
holiday season.
It's like watching Hallmark movies. It gets you in the mood.
Yes, it gets you in the mood, and it was so much fun. So I know I'm doing it again this year. But you have so much going on with the series, and then with this book, and you have to be just thrilled with how the reception of this book. Like I said, I've seen it all over.
I,
People are loving this book.
I am. This one was really like my heart book, and so it's personal for me. So putting it out there was a lot harder than any other book I've ever put out there. So getting the reviews and the people that have read it, the responses, I'm very happy with. Just because I know it's not going to be for everybody, but the people that it's for, it's finding its audience and touching them, and that's really, I can't ask for anything more.
Exactly. Oh, I'm so happy that I found it and that I got to read it
Me
and talk to
too.
you, because it meant so much to me, and I know that character Alice is just going to stick with me for a while.
Yeah.
It's one of those characters that sometimes you can read a book and then go to another book and it doesn't, but I know she's going to stick with me a while because, like I said, it's just you find her heart in there and as a woman, and it was such a great book. So anyway, thank you so much. I can't wait for the Christmas book. I will be looking for that. And everyone, I will have all of Shannon's links listed underneath here, wherever she is on social media, and the Amazon link to that book. So you just press on it and you can go right to the book and buy it, and because it's out. And do you know when a paperback's coming? Or is that is a paperback, right?
Yeah, the paperback's out and the ebooks. And there's actually a Goodreads giveaway going on right now for the ebook. If anybody wants to try to win that.
Yes. Yeah, I love those. Well, and I do my own giveaways, and I'll be giving away this book, but I do love, Goodreads does such great giveaways, and it really helps you guys. So I'm really happy about that. But thank you so much, Shannon. And I won't say goodbye because we'll talk again. Okay. Okay. Bye-bye.